So that means that not going to talk about what people are drinking, except what I am drinking, which is Mazoe. And this is in recognition. This is in recognition of the diasporans that are in town, and this is their favorite drink. So I thought, you know what, let me join them. But before we do that, I will allow you, Ruvaro, to. I'm not a dictator after all. So please tell us what the chaps are drinking, and we can start.
Well, this is actually the whiskey we had a couple of episodes ago from Silent at Jamtree. Hasn't pitched up yet, so we will go with this very good single malt. Trevor, you
keep it real. Zambezi straight from.
And Doc?
Yeah, I'm sharing the Krabbies. I mean, I'm a whiskey fanatic, so.
Okay, fantastic.
And he's wearing he's a boots guy, so he's a man to my own heart. But that looks like it's pink. I don't know.
I don't know the color. I don't know how to polish shoes, so they tend to change color with time.
No, he's always dashing. He's a dapper dresser. And thank you very much, gentlemen. Maybe before we start the show, maybe you can just give us a bit of background about who you are and perhaps why you're on this show, besides that you're our friends.
Okay, beautiful. My name is Gracian Muchikodzongi, or Dr. G, in short. So I'm a land scholar and mining scholar, so I write all the controversial stuff about land reform. I've done extensive research on the land issue in Zimbabwe. My whole PhD was on the subject, so we continue to write. We have a new book that came this year called The Future of Zimbabwe's Agrarian Sector. In this book, I'm the editor of this book, but we have fantastic Zimbabwean scholars, younger and up and coming Zimbabwean scholars, tackling quite a broad range of issues pertaining land question, the agrarian sector in Zimbabwe. So it's a very interesting book. It covers some of the issues that will emerge in this discussion. So in short, I'll give the colleague an opportunity to.
So a bit of background. I met Doc when he was just freshly minted from the University of Edinburgh.
Yes.
And he used to have these glasses, these geeky glasses that, and we ended up, I think, spending an entire evening discussing land reform and everything, social science, and I found him very fascinating. And I think 10 years on, we're still very good mates. I find his ideas very illuminating, and I'm looking forward to him expressing himself in the most diligent and thorough way he usually does. So welcome, Doc, and thank you very much for joining us here. Trevor, maybe you can just give us a bit of background about who you are and why you're here.
Thank you. Trevor is the name. I don't have a book like the Doc, but I'm one Zimbabwean who believes farming or agriculture is a discussion we can never run away from. You find in this country, given our history, given our resources, get the agriculture right, probably get the mining right, everything else falls into place. So yeah, looking forward to sharing notes on this subject. Let's see where it gets us.
Oh, fantastic. So
you're a farmer yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe just give us some color in terms of what kind of farming you're engaged in and how you're finding that space.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. I'm into onion, king onions. The idea is to be harvesting every other month, sending something to the market. So our anchor crop is onion. Then sweet potato is on the side. We alternate between those two. Then you can't call yourself a farmer if you don't have mombes and a bit of maize. So yeah, that's what I'm basically into. When you talk of the going is tough. I risk then getting into the nuts and bolts of the discussion, but you find the production costs and the marketing are what I would call the biggest nightmare. Everything else you can play around it, but those two, I think that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. So that's actually a real farmer, not one who claims to be a farmer. Please don't fire me, Mr. Producer. But anyway, To kick off, maybe, Doc, you could start by just giving us an idea. We've got a number of audience viewers and people who watch the show who are not as old as we are and are new and youngsters, and they would want to understand a bit of history about the fast track land reform. So if you could give us a bit of history, why did we have the land reform, the fast track land reform in the year 2000? What's the background? And, put us to space.
Oh, thank you. The land reform is a long process, which obviously was the basis of the land question was the basis of our liberation struggle. And it is the land question that culminated into the second Chimrenga and ultimately the independence of Zimbabwe in 1980. So because it was the core of our politics since independence, state making in the post-1980 the land question featured prominently in debates around addressing colonial era injustices around land ownership and so forth and so forth. But our first market-driven land reform, which was really a culmination of the compromises made during the Lancaster House Agreement, did not deliver the land as anticipated. So very insignificant amounts of land were delivered by the market-driven land reforms of the early 1980s. So when we hit up the ESAP era in the 1990s, the land reform had stalled. Because it had stalled, what we saw was also an ongoing economic crisis triggered by quite a lot of other factors which we don't have time to delve into. But what we can say, by 1999, there was a problem with the rural poverty, congestion, ecological problems where, and there was also real hunger among the peasantry, people who actually want land. Never mind the politics around it. But in short, we would say by 1999, Zimbabwe was socially, politically ready for the fast-track land reform. People know, of course, the fast track as the Jambanja time where people were occupying farms. And so there were two aspects. We had the official land reform program, and then we had the agitation from the landless led by war veterans. And what we saw was quite the widespread occupation of white-owned farmland by war veteran-led peasants. Debates around it. There's a lot of contestants, and there was, of course, a lot of contestations around the pros and cons and the challenges associated with the fast-track land reform. But the debate is largely settled now in terms of the land reform was redistributive. It had certain anomalies that still are lingering and need to be addressed. So even in scholarship, there is a widespread agreement that the land reform was redistributive, but never mind a lot of lingering issues around land tenure security, some distortions that have persisted in terms of multiple farm ownership, and also...
So, Doc, just to give us a bit of color, there's one question I've always had. It's around who owned the land before the colonial masters? And what was the land tenure system then?
It's a good question with a little bit of... of course, the land was owned by Africans under different chiefdomships. But the concept of land ownership was very different from the one introduced by Europeans. The land tenure system should be based on freehold. So the conceptualization of what the land is, what is the land, who owns the land and so forth, changed simply because of colonial norms of understanding land ownership. What we call the fencing of land, that one could fence a plot. Before the colonial era, we had abandoned land. So that's why we practiced what they would eventually call shifting cultivation, where you've got quite a lot of land. You could be farming here a little bit, and then if you feel that the land is no longer fertile, you move to another place, because it's not necessarily a capitalist enterprise. So hunting was prominent by then than farming. So you see, people did not farm commercially. You didn't have to plant 30 hectares of anything, because
But there was a lot of trading.
there was trading, but it was not really crop trading. It was mostly either in gold and other, maybe animals, skins, and so forth and so forth.
You're
So
not
agric-
really in farming, according to Trevor. You're not really in farming
So,
unless you're a
unless you're
cattle
Bombas.
farmer.
Yeah, but there was a
So-
lot
so
of
there was a lot
livestock.
of trading.
There was a lot of
Yeah.
livestock, of course.
So that's commerce. That's capitalism.
Yeah, that commerce, but the dynamics of that commerce are completely different from what we experienced under the colonial regime after 1890.
Okay, all right.
So I just have to put this point that so the conceptualization of land ownership or land tenure changes at the moment of the colonial incursion.
Okay, so fast forward to 2000, we have the fast track land reform. What's the restitution there? So we take back our land, and by land we mean Africans, right? And how many people were taken back to the land?
In odd, I don't have the figures at the top of my head,
Okay.
but what I can tell you, in odd over 10 million hectares were redistributed to a diverse group of farmers. We are talking of the peasants, we talk of middle-scale farmers, and then we have the agro-industrial estates that benefit from the land reform. So
Why was the land redistributed to only farmers? Why not every Zimbabwean, every African? Since it was every African who lost the land.
the land was not, actually speaking, the land reform was not redistributed to only farmers. What we saw was the land reform was underpinned by what you would, a group of war veterans and local people would occupy a farm. Whether you wanted to farm or you just wanted to go where you'd been removed during the colonial era. And we need to correct one misunderstanding of what the land reform was. The land reform was never actually just about agriculture. There was a grievance. The grievance around land reforms that people wanted to recover land lost during the colonial enclosure. So what we see, the agrarian aspect is only an aspect because, of course, we need to grow crops, we need to industrialize and so forth. But people always misunderstand why the land reform happens because they reduce land to an
So
agricultural
you say
commodity.
something that's interesting because your pre-colonial understanding was it was pre-capitalistic, and now you have a land reform which restores land back to its rightful owners, but now in a capitalistic or industrialized state, as you say. Can you speak to those contradictions and what they meant for the fast track?
There's not
land
even
reform?
any contradictions. You know, when Africans went back to the land after 2000, they had two motivations. The first motivation was colonial enclosure forced people into so-called reserves. And if you are speaking agroecologically, you'd see that these reserves are always in very bad agroecological locations, low rainfall, poor sandy soils, and so forth and so forth. So people had been removed from what we call the high veld, where agroecologically speaking, most of the good land in Zimbabwe is in the high veld.
Yes.
And also agroecologically speaking, fertile land in Zimbabwe is very limited. Very little amount of land is. So the colonial, so when people occupied land, they wanted better quality land, and they also wanted to recover ancestral lands lost during the colonial era. Of course, the productivity motive was important, and the government obviously had an intention that if you occupied a farm, you needed to demonstrate a level of productivity. But underpinning the agitation for land, or the discourse that even the war veterans were popularizing during the time, was that we were going to recover the lost ancestral lands. That's why the land reform is called the third Chimurenga. It's called the third Chimurenga for a specific reasons, because the agitation of the second Chimurenga and the liberation struggle was very much anchored on the land question. Now, because this was a momentous time, a very, of course, an opportunity to recover land, this is why the political rhetoric around it was that we were recovering lost ancestral lands, not for agricultural purposes only. So it is important to underscore that the land reform was not only motivated for agricultural
So we can
purposes.
say restitutive, right?
Yes,
It's
exactly.
Going back
Land
to its
restitution
rightful-
was key.
But
Although
but
officially
I've
we
asked-
didn't have
but-
a land restitution program.
But you haven't answered the question that there are many Zimbabweans who didn't partake in the land reform. Right.
That's-
So only farmers were given land.
It's a good question. I wouldn't say only farmers. And the word given is also assumes that the government was going.
Got
This
back
was
their
this was a government program underpinned by grassroots mobilization. When I say grassroots mobilization, that Tinashe Murapata would join a band of war veterans. I don't know if you come from Rewa or from Mashigo.
This Tinashe
When-
would join the
So wishes were horses.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So you would join them, for example, you join them and there's a farm near wherever you came from. And in some places it's very interesting. People think people were randomly occupying white old farm. Some people were specifically occupying farms that their families had been evicted from during the colonial era. So an individual would join a band of war veterans. They occupy a farm. The war veterans will, go through the whole procedure of showing
Occupation.
you
But then I think if you could answer the question,
which is
the question is there are many more Zimbabweans who did not occupy the land.
yeah,
who
they
were
were
not
reluctant.
farmers.
You see the problem with people without land. They are
Why
two
doesn't
things.
Tinashe have land?
Because he didn't join the war veterans in his area to occupy to join the land.
So it was
reform.
just a question
It was
of
an
who
open-
participated.
Yeah, because also remember, this was an open program. You could, if you were a professional and you had some money, demonstrate the capacity that you wanted land, you would apply for land. There were almost regular advertisements in the Herald showing if you wanted a farm, you could apply for land.
Okay, so-
but people were reluctant because they thought the land reform was not going to hold.
All right. Okay. So let's move on from that. Was it a success, and on what basis do you consider it a success? So 20 years on.
The first land
what do we-
reform, in quantitative, from a quantitative point of view, is the most redistributive land reform in the 21st century.
Okay.
And the beauty about it was very little funding was used to redistribute the land. It was a beneficiary-driven process. When I say that, land reforms are very expensive. And you just have to look back at the official land reform program in after 1980. It was a very expensive process. The reason it stalled was the money. But now we have this widespread, almost a global land reform program funded by the beneficiaries. You only had to occupy farms, and the planning phase of the government would follow. So it was the most redistributive land reform in the 21st century. But that's
Does
not
that make it successful?
success in quantitative terms. There are other aspects. Success is contextual. When you say success, what do you mean? Yes, in terms of numbers, a huge number of people, over a huge number of people.
maybe let's hear what Rufaro thinks.
So I think, you can, the way you look at it matters, right? So if you think about it simply from the perspective of justice and restitution, okay? So if my ancestors stole a bunch of land from you, and then you have a reform process in which you are given back that land that was stolen from your ancestors, and we just and that's the only criteria to say, is the land now, the people who grabbed this land in a way that's not just, have they now had to forfeit it? So if you look at it, if that's your benchmark for success, then in my mind, land reform was very successful, right? But if you look at it from the perspective of, you have these Zimbabweans who are living on marginal land in reserves or wherever they are, right? And
Who were pushed out.
Post 1890, right? And they're living in poverty, right? And your primary motivation is so that these people are better off, right? So you're saying the reason why they're living in poverty is because of this historical imperial colonialism, and the best way to lift them out of poverty into prosperity is to allocate land to them. So if you look at land reform through that lens, I would say it's been an abysmal failure. Because most of those people are not better off.
So, okay, so I'm going to push back a bit on your analogy. There so many supervening issues. It's complex. People are not poor purely because of the land. But the question we should ask is the people that were in these marginal areas, how many of them have been moved back to their old lands? And I don't know how many were moved back to their old lands. And if they want land, so not just those who were privy to the land reform program because they were old enough, it's also very possible. Like I said, we've got a lot of youngsters who listen to the show who could not invade with the Wolverts, as you would say. So yes, I was old enough, I could have done that. I didn't. But maybe my son would have wanted to. But unfortunately, he just wasn't born yet. But he has no claim to land at this particular moment in time. So this is just to push back on what Rufaro is saying, but also to just contextualize that. I hear what Rufaro is saying, but maybe if we contextualize it from a restitutive perspective, that I don't think it has been fully restitutive.
Look,
Sorry, Doc.
land reform, I just want to respond to him quickly because then it could be lost. I think the issue of success is relative in terms of what is your conceptualization of success. We have a significant number of people now on the land. And that's not to say there's no land hunger. Obviously, I'll go to Tinashe's issue that the people who were very young during the land reform, we are talking of 20-something years ago, are adults now, and some of them are in need of the land in their own right. It's an issue that is pertinent, that in the phase of land reform, to address landlessness among those people who were youths that are now adults and those who did not benefit from the land reform. Our book, the editorial to this book, which I wrote myself, speaks to those things.
Well, we hope you did.
We speak to those things. We don't glorify. Our issue as scholars is not suddenly to glorify that. And we say, as agrarian scholars, that the benefit of a large-scale land reform program, such as that happened in Zimbabwe, can only be realized even after a century. So we are not unaware.
So it's an ongoing process.
We are not unaware of the productivity challenges faced by the new farmers. For example, you have to contextualize. When you give people land, you've got to capacitate them. You've got to help them also address issues of climate change. Zimbabwe is a country that suffers droughts on a regular basis. So the new farmers, the environment has been not very kind to them in terms of, we are talking of the various categories of the farmers, from the A1, the peasants, we go to the A2
Doc,
farmers.
This might be a good time for Trevor to chime in. What are your views on this?
I have a different view to the question that was raised earlier on.
Which is fantastic. That's what we encourage.
Which is to say, what will happen to your son today who wants land? Today, because there is land somewhere, your son feels entitled. Fine. Fast forward to 300 years from today. There will be another son, someone's son, who also wants land. So this land is not growing. I think we need to agree.
It's finite.
Yeah. So there is a point in time where we have to say.
So you're going back to Rufaro's.
The issue is not given to printing, yeah?
Yeah. So for me, it comes back. It comes back to say what were or are the objectives of land reform. That question I think is very important. If we all agree that it's restitution, you just want to give the next guy, then fair and fine. We can do that for the next 500 years.
Well, he says 100 years.
But
It's
for
an
me,
ongoing process.
But for me, the reason why there is hunger for land is because I can see the guy next door not utilizing it. So I feel and I think I'm better than the next guy. So I'm like, you know what? Since I'm doing nothing in town, why don't I go Kumusha and start farming?
Doc, would you want to answer that? Because I think that's a very pertinent question.
It's an issue that has not emerged, yes, during the questions, but one of the fundamental challenges we have now, so-called post the land reform, there's never a post in a land reform process. Like I said, the land reform was redistributive, but there are still anomalies, colonial era anomalies in terms of equity. We need to address the distortions in the new agrarian structure. When I say distortions, I mean there is a certain group of people, a minority group of people who are sitting on land holdings, a huge amounts of land that is underutilized. And I think for me, we have enough space to create an opportunity for those without land to access land. And one of the suggestions that have been made by us in the scholarship is that I really don't see a reason why anyone in Zimbabwe should have more than one farm. And I also don't see a reason why anyone should have more than 200 hectares. Because those people sitting on those farms are saying, we have enough land to accommodate the landless. We just need to take a proactive approach to address the distortions. Why should we have a guy sitting on over 5 farms that they are not working on, while at least we have people, including young people, who want to gain access to land? I think the government must take a proactive approach to flush those people out and make sure that those people with excess land, that land is taken over, and then we redistribute that land to people who are still waiting to gain access to land.
So on that one, Doc, if I can ask a question, just to test the principle. If I have 5 farms, 1,000 hectares each, and I'm super productive, would that same argument hold? Super productive, everyone knows I'm the best in Mombes, best in maize, best in cabbage. Would that argument also hold?
I generally think that we must have a criteria. I think generally in this country, I would want you to count 100 people who are able to work on 5 farms. There will be very little. And I think there should be a facility that if someone had the capacity, must demonstrate the capacity that they need 5 farms. Fair enough. If they are productive and contribute to the economy, give them that land. But my argument is that a huge number of people that are sitting on 5 farms are not productive. So we need to recover that land and give it to some of the young people who are agitating to gain access to land. And also, I think we need equity. Why should one guy sit on 5 farms when the ethos of the land reform was to make sure that there is equity? We've got younger people that Tinashe was talking about. We have people who never benefited from the land reform. And I want to mention this. One of the anomalies now is that we've got poor people sitting on land who are not productive. People with money, legitimately entitled to gain access to land. Let's address that, because we do have land. We have enough land to redistribute to those people who are still in need of land. So equity is important. But also, we must also not ignore some of the challenges faced by the new farmers. There are people who always want to blame the new farmers by saying...
So I think there, Trevor has a lot to say. Maybe, Trevor, could you give us an idea of what the experience of the farmers, the new farmers, has been on the land 20 years on?
I'll start with, should I call it a point of order? Call it order, comrade, where you come from. To say 20 odd years after a process, we are using the term new farmers. I personally have a problem with that, because as long as we remain in that mode of being new, we are not going to reach our potential. There's a point in time where we need to probably stop using the term, understand that we are there and we are there for good, if I can say that. But yeah, 20 or so years later, I think the challenges that we have are quite evident on the ground. I'll introduce a subject which Tinashe has got feelings over, but it's the issue to do with the famous or infamous command agriculture. Emotions aside, look back at how inputs were distributed to people who had, let's say, funding challenges, etc., and the ordinary guy who accessed those inputs, quite a number utilized them. We can discuss, I think, like you were saying, the finer details.
The PEMSEC, George Gomatanga, will disagree with you. Only 22% pay back their loans.
Good.
78% of the farmers don't pay back their loans.
If maybe then we drill down a bit more and try and identify the 22%, it could actually be a very interesting discussion. Because the one thing that we seem to notice, even in our day-to-day lives, the ordinary you and I pay back our loans. Debt collector comes, you pay back your loan. But someone up there will say, what's the problem?
Is this the comrade where you're saying the chefs are not paying back their loans?
The good thing is I didn't say that. You did. but you see, I think that's exactly where the issue is, because
so maybe I think let's zoom in let's, for the purposes of this discussion, assume that from a restitution perspective, land reform was perfect. Okay, we put that argument aside, and we want to apply our minds to going forward, right? What X should we be solving for when we talk about the current state of land and agriculture? And by what X, what I'm saying is, what is the number one outcome that we should be trying to achieve? Because if we can agree on what the outcome, the best outcome is, then we can then have a conversation about what is the best process that is most likely to deliver that outcome. So what do you think that outcome should be? You know, if we say, look, we've done a perfect job restitution, now we need to make this work, what outcome should we be aiming for?
Yeah, one of the fundamental issues has been productivity, particularly among so-called A2 farmers, the people we anticipate to be more productive. And there is
Are they letting us down?
That group has let them down, but I don't want to accuse it without giving a background to their problems. They have a problem of tenure security in terms of mortgaging their land in order to acquire loans from banks. Their banks have not been playing ball in terms of embracing these farmers, because the 99A lease as a collateral instrument has been very difficult.
How many people have actually been given these 99
Exactly,
leases?
I'm going there. The government has been very slow in terms of extending these 99A leases so that a select few has them. And what that means is that a lot of people cannot leverage their new land holdings to acquire loans from the banks. So that obviously puts them at a very bad footing to start with, because you can't be a sort of commercial farmer who does not have access to capital. So they have had a problem, and some of them have also been mischievous. They've been given inputs by the government and then redirected those inputs to the informal market. So the state has tried, within the context of an enduring economic crisis, the government has tried to support these farmers, but I don't think the support is adequate.
But who is the more mischievous entity here? Because human beings are predictable. If you give a guy a bunch of inputs, and it's easier for that guy to get a return selling those inputs outright without exerting themselves on a farm, right? If you picked 100 humans randomly from anywhere in the world and you gave them those options, here's a bunch of inputs, you can go onto the side of the road and sell them and immediately pocket some cold hard cash, or you can put those inputs at risk on a piece of land and hope it rains and everything works out, and at the end of the process there's going to be value. I mean,
I'll say a little and then give it to him. Because I think we have had written papers around the problems of how this support program was structured, and in terms of making sure that these people were actually using the inputs as required. I think there were problems in terms of how it was structured. And I think, let me give him an opportunity as a farmer to tell
Trevor,
me what is the problem.
tell us. you heard what Rufaro had to say.
Yeah.
I concur.
Okay, I always like to take a step back before going forward. Rufaro mentioned a very good point to say it was easier for the guy to go along the highway, flag this guy down, get money. But the question is, why? It's also because the farmer, in my view, has not been given his or her rightful place in the food chain. Look at how farming is demanding. Look at the problems associated with it.
But you're running away from Rufaro's question.
No, I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
A lender has given you inputs.
No, I'm getting there.
And you have a responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But after I've done everything responsibly, then I go and try and sell my maize. I go and try and sell my cabbage. I go and try and sell my tomato. That's why it's easier for me to sell a bag of fat than actually than actually go and farm. That's where the problem is. So when I say the farmer has not been respected.
No, I think you guys are not being honest. There are no consequences for bad debt farmers in Zimbabwe. That's the honest truth. That's why year in, nobody pays back, because there are no consequences.
One, and two.
So you are agreeing that there are no consequences for not paying back your debt if you're a farmer?
Not entirely. It's not a yes or no question.
it's not-
It's not a yes or no question.
Okay.
Yeah. Because with the problem that we mentioned, I'll support you for 10 seconds and say the same guy who went along the highway, sold his 10 bags, surprise, surprise, next year goes to a certain funder, he's the first one to be given inputs. And now that's where the problem is, which is why we said, what is that 22% and what is the other number?
Well, from the work that we understand from agriculture, what they do is the same piece of land. So this year, it will be the father that will go and get the inputs. And next year, it will be the mother. And then the year after that, it will be the firstborn son. Then the year after that is the...
But you realize...
And it continues like that.
But you
until
realize...
it comes back to the father. But it's the same piece of land. And I wanted to go back to what Doc is saying. So this is something I actually know something about in terms of farming, on capitalization, because you said there was not much spent on the land reform. One of the critical things that we missed on the land reform was, my dad was actually a land surveyor. And what he used to do is he used to peg farms. So before the land reform, so back in the 80s and the 90s, they would literally go around, whether you're subdividing or you're selling, whatever, they would peg farms. And this hasn't happened. 20 years on, most of the farms are not pegged at all. So in terms of capitalizing our land reform, perhaps that's something that we did not take care of, that we need to. Because when you look at your 99-year leases and a lot of issues around tenure, first of all, can you correctly identify the piece of land?
Yes, you can. I mean, there's been efforts. We can't say the farms were not pegged. There are anomalies in
They
the
were
pegging.
paid once upon a time, but
Yeah, they are pegged.
since then...
And also, there have been programs. I've written a paper for the Ministry of Lands around land tenure and the issues. There have been a program that was looking at funding the Surveyor General's Department to actually survey and digitize and to develop some cadastral records that are proper. And part of the procedure to acquire a 99-year lease is that your farm has to be surveyed and the records digitized and so forth, knowing what infrastructure is there and so forth. So we have done some partial surveying.
Okay.
It's not complete, and it's one of the sources of conflicts around land ownership and around the issue of getting a 90-year lease and then collateralize your farm to gain money. So we have an idea of who is farming where, although it's an idea. We could have a perfect cadastral records that can help us to identify who is farming where. And if these people are not productive, how do we get rid of them?
Okay.
So
So do we agree that, what's your view, if we put the restitution issue aside and say, look, let's move forward, do you agree with the doc that productivity should be the number one outcome we're looking for?
100%.
Okay, so let's call that land reform 2.0.
So how do we
So-
get productivity? Do you agree that productivity is the number one outcome we should be aiming for?
Not necessarily, I would say, but I wanted us to discuss that because I think that land reform 1.0 was very sectarian. It was those who supported the war vets, which is fine. It has happened because they're the ones who invaded
I
the
would
land,
say
right?
joined.
Joined the land. But I think that land reform 2.0, I sort of agree with everything that you guys are saying, that this is a long road. It's not something that you do and then that's the end. So I think that we're at that moment where we should have land reform 2.0. And in my world, land reform 2.0 starts with land tenure. And I would like us to discuss that. Maybe, Rufaro, let's hear your view on land tenure. What do you think the land tenure? So this is now, land reform 1.0 has already happened. Land reform 2.0, and we're focusing on land tenure. What are your views on land tenure? What system should Zimbabwe have?
So my view is give people title deeds, give them skin in the game, give them longevity. So before land reform, the white commercial farmers, the 4,000, they were some of the most productive farmers on the planet, right? But if you actually look at how those farmers ended up on the land, if you go back to the 1930s and 40s, a lot of the white immigrants that came in got land and once upon a time there were actually almost 100,000 of them with land. But
Over time.
over time, what would happen is the farmers who weren't any good lost money, failed, had, you know, and the title deeds to their farm ended up at an auction, you know, to recover debts. And the farmers who were very profitable, who were very good over time, had appetite to actually increase the hectareage that they would farm, and they had the capacity to acquire more land. So over time, you then had this process where the bad farmers are weeded out, and then you have the best farmers, and that's what you need going forward
so
in 2.0.
you believe in private title to land?
Absolutely.
Doc?
Yeah, to start with, I want to correct one misconception. There is no direct link between land tenure security and productivity. It's not true to say if we give everyone in Zimbabwe a title deeds, we will suddenly see a spike in production. It's not true. In fact, if you did a historical analysis of the white farmers in Rhodesia, they only succeeded on the back of distortions. If you look at the Maize Control Act of 1934, I think, it was really the people with very insecure tenure in rural areas who were the most productive farmers, grain farmers. So the Rhodesian government had to come up with a scheme of disadvantages African farmers who were insecure. Yet the farmers that were secure were not that productive. So I would caution anyone to always think that freehold title is a form of superior tenure. It's a very Western-centric thinking. You will be amazed.
So what would you advocate for? So this is
Oh,
land reform 2.0,
the tenures
and we're
that
focusing,
we have.
right now I don't want us to focus on production, we'll get there, but we're focusing on
The tenures,
tenure.
there's nothing necessary.
What tenure would you
There's
prefer?
nothing necessarily bad with the kind of tenures. I'll do this if I was
An offer
given
letter,
opportunity.
nothing bad.
I was saying, for example, the farmers that are struggling, we mentioned them, the A2 farmers. Why can't we just globalize the 99-year lease and make that it's much more secure and leverageable? We would need to strengthen the 99-year lease, and the government have tried to do it.
So you
with the
believe,
support of
you
the-
believe in a 99-year
I wouldn't
lease?
say I believe. I think those tenure, there's nothing.
We're
wrong
trying to
with-
define what is the best,
Yeah.
Doc. So
I
What-
believe in
what-
the 99-year lease. And we are
So
not
right
the first
across.
country to, we didn't even introduce it here in Zimbabwe. It's been used in other countries, successfully so. We are saying the 99-year lease can be strengthened and our banks must play ball.
what's the benefit of a 99-year lease?
The 99-year lease just makes sure that if people eventually, the land can be reverted back to the state. We should have the...
So if I have a 99-year lease today, and then 2 generations from me, my grandchildren or great-grandchildren are working on that piece of land, and there's a year left now, do you think they'll be able to walk into a bank and say, look, you know, these are our financials, we've been farming this land for the last 98 years, we're a serious farming family, but the lease expires in a year, I have no idea whether we'll get it renewed. Do you think a bank manager is going to advance my progeny?
You're not going to leave it to a year before you start the renewal process. All things being fair and square and you being productive and the state being very sympathetic to your productivity history, I'm sure you can negotiate to have that lease renewed, and whoever your great-grandchildren, whoever...
Maybe you didn't articulate the question well. I will articulate it for you. What problem are you trying to solve with a 99-year lease?
We are trying to collect...
Why not a 1,000-year lease? Why not 2,000?
How did we arrive at the number?
How did we?
4 years.
Why not 4 years? Why are you? Why 99?
Look.
What problem are you trying to solve?
I'm not a specialist on the 99-year list, but it wasn't invented in Zimbabwe. It was invented somewhere. There were benefits of that.
That doesn't make it clever.
And I'm not saying it's clever at all. I'm saying it is a list that has been invented long back ago, and it has its own challenges and its own benefits. And I think there's nothing wrong with the 99-year list if
but
it's
Doc,
secure. It's a secure form of tenure.
Doc, we're saying 2.0 because if it's about security or tenure, then full title has better security or tenure than 99-year lease. But we're saying those who are advocating for 99-year lease might actually have a good idea, might actually have very credible reasons why a lease,
99
a 99
years
lease
is better than
is
forever.
better than forever. So
let me
we want
just
that
warn you.
argument. Maybe Trevor.
No,
What's
before
your
you rush,
preference?
quickly.
Okay.
There is no tenure that is secure for your own reason, for your own information. What happened in 2000 is a good lesson. Any tenure can be, any tenure can be potentially be vulnerable to. The only person with the absolute rights, the absolute a bit of land rights is the state.
I think fair enough.
So what we are saying is, let's
within the
not
confines.
put this idea that freehold title is secure, is completely secure. It's not, and Zimbabwe is a very important case study to say almost all the farmers that were occupied by war veterans, those had freehold tenure, a lot of those farms. So it tells you that it depends with the political dynamics of that particular country, you know?
Yeah. Look, I'm going to push back a little bit there. So what I'll say, I'll give you an analogy, and I'll use bonds. Okay. So in the developed world, they have what they call the risk-free rate, right, on government paper. So the British government, for example, will issues pound-denominated debt. It's considered risk-free, right? But as an investment professional, I can tell you that there's no investment that's risk-free, right? But conceptually, the idea is that, you know, they can always print pounds as the British government, so they will never be able to fail to pay. Now, yes, 2000 is a great example of title deeds losing their security, but what you want to do is you want to create a framework where people have comfort, right? So nobody believes that if they're holding a title deed, it's the same as being in heaven and having this forever risk-free. But it's much, much more, it gives you much more assurance and comfort than a 99-year lease.
Okay, so we've got a comment here from George. And George he's been a banker who has actually dealt with 99-year leases. And this is what he says. He says, the only problem with 99-year lease is it can't be transferred without the minister's okay. So a minister has to sign off for a 99-year lease to be transferred. Trevor, would you like to speak to that and also your views on what's your preference?
99-year lease, title deed, what do you prefer?
Or state land, it's all...
None of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. I tend to look at things differently. I don't think tenure is the problem at hand. It's been made the problem, but I don't think it's the problem at hand. My view is that for as long as one is productive...
So you're perfectly fine with offer letters?
I'm fine with offer letters for as long as when I knock at your door to access certain funding, you can then open and you sit down and talk.
Why would I give you a loan based on an offer letter?
Because at that moment...
an offer letter can be withdrawn at any point. Arbitrarily.
Just like in 2000, we learned a lot of new things.
Exactly.
So at the end of the day, whatever piece of paper you want, the same thing will happen.
Okay.
So I think we need to agree on that.
Let me contextualize again. Guys, we're saying this is Land Reform 2.0.
Yeah.
The mistakes that we've learned from 1.0. And we're trying to improve because, as Doc has correctly said, this thing is going to be with us for 100 years. Trevor says 500 years. So we're saying, but surely in 100 years' time, we should be on 5.0 or 10.0, and it will be far better than 1.0. But you guys are still drawing us back to 1.0. What we want to define is, for 2.0, what is the best tenure system? Or what are the alternatives?
And I want to...
And then let's look at all the alternatives and find out what could be most suitable for Zimbabwe.
So I want to push back a little bit on your, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's an offer letter or 99-year lease. Today in Harare, or in Zimbabwe rather, if you have title deeds to a residential property or a commercial property, you can walk into a bank and have a conversation about collateral and unlock funding. If you walk into that same bank holding a piece of paper called an offer letter, you can have that conversation, but the results will be radically different. Okay? So what I'm saying is,
This is why I said none of the above. Yeah, I'll let you finish. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, you know, the guy at the bank, the banker, right, has an opinion, right, about offer letters, 99-year leases, title. And this is not just, my opinion, right? This is actually the reality on the ground today, right? So we can't ignore that reality, to say that all of
So
these...
Trevor,
all
maybe
of these
Trevor
are
and then
the
Doc
same.
can reply to that.
I'm
Trevor.
itching to respond.
Yeah, please, Trevor, go ahead.
I'll defend the guy in the bank for 10 seconds again. It's because of precedence. A certain precedence was set. This guy gave money to Mr. X or Miss Y, and 2-3 years later, nothing happened. So the guy in the bank, you can almost understand why he or she is doing that. But if we go back to the problem at hand, the issue is about productivity. We can all see what's happening on other pieces of land, where someone comes, rents out that land, combines 4 or 5 farms, boom, production is there. But the tenure has not changed. It's your piece of paper, his piece of paper, which I come and work on, and I make money, pay rent. This is why I say none of the above. For as long as then you want to make money, you are into investments, high risk, high return. Guys are making money on your offer letter. But you've got enough reasons why you're not making money. So that's where my problem is.
But I also want to...
Doc,
the bankers
respond to
have been
that?
very mischievous, I think, and also they have been political.
What are you saying about my friend George?
We must not run away from the fact that if Mr. White turned up in a bank and Mr. Mrapata turned up in the bank, by just the extent of your surnames, the banker, because...
What are you saying about my son?
So our banks have been traditionally white-owned banks. Of course, we now have a plethora of indigenized banks, and some of our new businesses have benefited from the indigenization of banking institutions because they've been favorable to initiatives taken by blacks. What we are saying is that, remember, the bankers were very antagonized during the land reform. So there's nothing actually wrong with the 99-year lease. All things being square, there's nothing wrong with the 99-year lease. The banks have been deliberately withholding because they don't trust the government, they don't trust the 99-year lease.
Do you trust them?
In all things being fair and square, the 99-year lease have been done in other countries successfully. So what we are seeing here is that the banks have been very antagonistic to the land reform. If I can tell you, back in the colonial era, banks have been known to give loans that are unsecured.
May I say something for somebody who actually studied land tenure systems, that most farm is actually capitalized by equity. It's actually not capitalized by debt. And where we are in our developmental process, a lot of the land will be developed from equity, right? And when you look at equity, we must ask ourselves, the only reason why I will put a dam, I will put a home, I will put everything, is if I actually believe that my grandkids will benefit from it.
Yeah.
But if I think that this is purely a commercial enterprise where I am leeching off the land as much as I can because I'm afraid that somebody will take it over, or in 99 years, that's it, then there's a problem. I think where we are as a developmental country is we're at the stage where we need the farmer or whoever has occupied the land to put in a lot more of their own money. And what is more secure for them to put out more of their money? The other thing that we perhaps don't want to talk about productivity, and now I can, because I am actually anchoring the show, I can abuse you guys. And we can move to productivity. But I want you to contextualize 2 things on productivity as you discuss these points. So there's productivity pertaining to actually how much we produce on the land. So if you say productivity, you're looking at the Netherlands, for example. So there's farming productivity. But there's also use of land productivity, where I might actually decide to take a different view on the productivity of the land and decide to go into real estate or into tourism or into any other. And unfortunately, Land Reform 1.0 is very explicit on land use. So as you're discussing productivity, I want us to discuss those two issues. Productivity, how do we become a Netherlands, which is more productive in farming? But second of all, how do we ensure that 2.0, we can actually change the land use? And it's okay to change land use. Trevor, maybe you want to start off.
I think for me, it starts with the mindset. Remember earlier on, I was mentioning about being called a new farmer and saying, no, guys, let's change that. So coming to this issue, let's not view farming as the 10 bags of maize that you got from my field, which is what everyone focuses on. But where I come from, I've got 30 or so employees who come in, day out. They send their kids to school because of the X amount I give them. After I harvest my 10 bags, the whole community, we call it Kusairira, where we come from. All the Mombes come into my place, feed off whatever is left in there, etc. What I'm saying is, if we focus too much on that 5 hectares that I have, we might end up missing the point.
So you're saying let's look at the full ecosystem.
Yeah.
There's an entire ecosystem around farming.
Which is why
So productivity, you're actually extending my productivity. It's beyond just the farming. It's the entire ecosystem.
I'm partially answering the question which other people say day in, day out, to say, why don't we take that 300 USD and import from Zambia? That's a common question. Yeah, you can do that, but what happens to these 30 people I've been paying day in, day out, who are also now sending their kids to school because of that salary? What happens to that welder by that corner?
But the question
I
still,
can answer that, but
how do you make that ecosystem more productive?
I think for me, the one thing we probably don't want to talk about, but anyway, I'll talk about it.
That's why it's Friday drinks. We can talk about anything.
Then blame it.
nobody's
no
taking us
hope,
seriously.
Then
We
blame
have
it on the
policy here. We're
Zambezi
just having a
afterwards.
beer. We're just having a drink.
I think it's harsh, but it's reality. It's high time we started believing on our own, believing in ourselves. To say, if I come to you with an idea, he gave an example. Mr. Smith walks in, likely people are going to listen. Then Mseamwa comes in, and the moment you walk in, people just look down and all that. That's the reality of what's on the ground. We've seen
So
places.
a cultural change.
Yeah, we need to change the way we think.
Okay, I'm going to push back.
No. Let's, Doc, please. So two issues on productivity. Farm productivity, how do we become the Netherlands of Africa? And then the second thing is, how do we change land use?
We need a whole sort of thinking. I think I will go back just 1 second to go back to the issue of land tenure and so forth. I think a lot of
Doc,
institutions.
you can't do that.
A lot of
that's
institutions
why we're
want-
on this show.
Yeah.
You can't do that. Please answer on the two issues, because we need to move on. There's so many things that we need to cover.
So we are saying the issue of he's been capturing these things very well. I think in terms of productivity, what we needed was to have a new infrastructure. We are dealing with a new agrarian structure, which is not based, and people keep referring to the back. We need new ways of thinking, and like he was saying, because what we lost because of the land reform, because it agitated quite a lot of people. The Rhodesian era type of agriculture system was very kinship based. When I say that it was kinship based, is that most Rhodesian grown tobacco, for example, had preferential marketing in the UK and other jurisdictions because it was based on tribalism and kinship ties to the motherland. Now we are saying we need to develop an agricultural system that utilizes a very inward-looking supply chain system. Because one of the fundamental problems, for example, of the new farmers that had taken over from the white farmers, that suddenly they could not market their products to the very people where their predecessors were marketing. Suddenly you have countries saying, this is coming
So
through.
EU, we can't export our beef to the EU.
So you'd hear, if you were selling your stuff, your tobacco, you say, no, you are farming on a contested piece of land, so I don't want to buy from you. Because then you have got this kinship-based grudges that you're a new farmer, is probably stole the land.
So that's believing in our own.
We need
That's
to
what
believe
he's
in
talking
our-
about.
We're a small market. The reality is, if you had to export your beef to Europe or export your beef, or internally, it's
That's
just
why
won't work.
most of our tobacco
better
is going to
off.
China. These are new
I beg
markets.
to
Okay,
that are
okay.
not-
So I think to correctly capture what you guys are saying is that there is an entire supply chain and ecosystem. How do we improve
Exactly.
that supply chain? Is cultural change. How about land use, where I change the land use? Because right now we cannot change land use. Land use right now is primarily farming. If you're on,
I think we
but
can.
in 2.0, do you see the possibility where a farmer could actually change the land use?
Of course we can, because, again, we need to look at the discussion in a political context. People forget that political systems are evolving. We should always at the back of our mind not think that the political context obtaining today is the same political context that will be there in 20 years. What we are saying, land use patterns will change as the dynamics change in terms of productivity. I don't necessarily believe.
So you're
this
open
huge-
to it?
Yeah, huge
Okay.
scale farms. I think they are outdated. You are talking of the Netherlands. That's a land short country. I worked in farms in England in early 2000. I was working on an organic farm. These people are being productive in a very small patch of land, and that's the pattern we need. We need to encourage people to be productive in very small patches of
Thank you.
land.
Because
So wait, I think let's give
Okay.
the time now to, he's been patient enough, and I think he deserves the mic. Rufaro, those two questions. So the questions is, how do we become more productive, like the Netherlands, in farming? And then the second question is, how do we change the land use? How do we give the farmer the ability to change land use without having to confer with government or with the powers that be?
So if you looked at the dispensation before land reform, where the farmers had title, they could actually do. They didn't have a constraint vis-a-vis land use. So if they wanted their farm to be, a game park and have safaris or build hotels and lodges and chalets, they had the freedom to do so. They could do whatever they wanted. So title solves the land use
lot of these issues,
question.
okay.
And I also think that title solves the productivity question.
Okay. How?
Because if
A
I
certain type of title.
freehold title, in my opinion.
be clear, because-
So if I am not producing anything on my land, I'm not getting any income from my land.
Yeah.
Right? But I have a title deed. And there's a market where these things are changing hands. And there's constantly people who are doing well in farming who are calling me and saying, listen, you don't seem to be doing anything on your land. I want to buy it, right? I can, how many hectares do you have? Wouldn't you be better off if I give you a check and you walked away, right? So you're empowering the person who's on the land, right? Because so that takes care of all your concerns for why that person isn't productive in the first instance. They don't have the capital, they don't have the skills, they've got all these other challenges, right? But here's an opportunity for them to walk away with a meaningful check, right? And anybody writing that check must have a plan for that piece of land to recoup their investment, right? And where people fail and they get things wrong, then they have to sell.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think now we can just take a minute's break. We do have different channels. We're on different channels. So we've got YouTube, we've got Facebook, and we've got Twitter Space. But on Twitter Space, we'll continue the conversation. But to our audience that's on YouTube, see you after the break.
But you might also want to allow your guests
Okay, welcome back, our YouTube audience and our Facebook audience. This has been quite a riveting discussion. And the second half, what we would like to do is to get as many speakers as possible from the audience, especially from our Twitter space. I see there's a lot of activity that's happening there. So maybe to just kick off, we would have Taka. And Taka, you can speak. You can go ahead and give us your views.
Okay, thanks, Tina. That's an interesting subject that you are discussing, the issue of land reform. I've been following quite attentively Rashid Taura in the space. You know, the issue of land reform, I would like to agree with the speaker who said the banking institutions were not very supportive of the land reform. And the conditions there they put for you to be financed. I've also lived in South Africa where we know if you are white, your access to loans is actually easier than black. That's a reality on the ground. The same applies to Zimbabwe. There was not much support from the banking sector. They wanted title deeds, all those things that the small holding farmers did not have. And even the market, the export market nowadays, if you want to export, the first thing they want is a title deed to the land that you are producing, to have title. All this is meant to close out the beneficiaries of the land reform. That's the reality of it. But now, the government tried in its own with the mechanization funding, but also the problem on the government was corruption. Most of these programs were hijacked and benefited people who could actually afford to fund their farming activities. They benefited ministers, leaders of churches that we know that are popular, and those people, they've got money. And instead of creating a revolving fund, having realized that the private sector is not willing to fund the new farmers, instead of having this revolving fund where people who benefited are given time and pay the money, the challenges that happened, the money was looted, and we all know about the debt assumption that ended up being assumed by government. That is another challenge. The land reform itself was a very good policy, and the benefits with time we always realize. I always speak to people and tell them, look, I will not compare myself to Van Herten, because Van Herten is maybe the 20th generation of a farmer in their family, and we are first commercial farmers. Those beneficiaries would be the first commercial farmer generation in it. We are going to have problems, but eventually the program will succeed. What it needs is proper funding. The issue of 99-year lease, yes, is right. The land should not belong to individuals, should belong to the state. But the state must be responsible as well in its ownership.
Taka, would you like to explain why it should belong to the state?
Well, because like farmland, it's difficult to if it belongs to individuals, you understand, they can do anything with it without the benefit of everyone because they are private property, and the government can actually change the use of the land depending on the needs, having seen the development. The only challenge is, are they going to do it with much responsibility, with much fairness? That's the topic. That's a topic for another day to debate. But I prefer if the government owns, so that we know this land, if you are not productive, the government can actually take it away from you because it's not yours. But now, if you own it, it's going to be difficult. You hear of private property rights and all those things. So it's going to be difficult for the government to repossess this land back if they give you and you own it. So the land should actually, the ownership should vest in the state. What the government can do to address the issue of security in terms of loans is to guarantee any funding that is given to farmers and have a fund that guarantees, so that underwrites that loan to say if it's not paid, we who cover the loan and make sure that people who actually deliberately don't pay their penalties, which include even being taken into prison as well, as part of it. That's
Okay.
if they are
So,
serious.
Taka, when government guarantees, it's the taxpayer that eventually pays. Do you think that a taxpayer should guarantee, especially a taxpayer who's not a farmer, should guarantee a farmer who then absconds?
Remember now, that's why I'm looking at. Look, when you fund someone, you are not funding someone who's going to deliberately abscond. There's due diligence that we do. The only missing thing within the requirements should be the availability of security, where the government will step in and secure. If a farmer, for instance, you fund me, you give me 50,000 to invest in the land and plow and plant, then I deliberately divert the funds for other use. There should be sort of a penalty which includes jail term. Maybe send me to prison, arrest me, charge me, send me to prison.
Has to go
Because
to
because that would be theft. Because you misrepresented, you wanted a loan to invest in a farm and you did not. So it's theft, misrepresentation. They make it a serious crime. Send me for 10 years. Then people will be serious about farming. They know what they are getting into. Only serious people will apply for those loans. Those who are not productive, the land, the government can actually repossess the land because it's theirs. Then the other challenge that people don't see that's actually affecting our new farmers, it's not funding. It's the price of the commodity of maize, the price of all those agricultural produce that the government offers to the farmers. I will tell you a case in point. The season before last season, a lot of people were very much back, and there was a lot of production harvest whilst people make money. Following season, the government decided to pay peanuts, willing to pay people 150 per ton, and yet they are paying imported maize 308. It's those things because farming is a business. If it costs me more to produce a ton of maize than buying it from GMB, why would I do that? You understand? So the government itself has been shooting down black farmers. They are offering very low price, which are very ridiculous and competitive. They are not commercial prices.
Taka, do you think do you think government should be setting prices of these things, or the market should just set prices like everywhere else in the world?
The market ideally should be setting price for this. I think the market should determine the price, so that. But the challenge is you find that it's going to be difficult because in the market, without proper controls, which the government now need to, because if it becomes a player, it's difficult. I think the government should take form of a regulator and ensure there's no collusion, or maybe set a minimum price to say the price should not be lower than a certain point.
Okay.
You know?
So Taka, I'm gonna keep you as a speaker because I see you've got lots of things to say, but I'm gonna give it to Martha to also give us a female view. She's a farmer as well. Let's hear what her perspectives are. Martha, would you like to unmute yourself and give us your perspective and your views? Okay, we seem to have a technical challenge there. But if anyone else wants to speak, please put your hand up and I will allow you to speak. But maybe, Doc, Taka has said quite a bit. Your takeaways, things that you agree, things you'd like to challenge. I know that Rufaro would like to challenge quite a bit, but maybe Doc, you can start by responding and then Trevor can respond. I think Trevor also has he's receiving numerous messages, one of which is from his sweetie, who's encouraging him to say one or two things. So I'm sure Trevor will
go first since
So,
Sweetie has
okay,
intervened?
so since Sweetie has intervened, we'll give Trevor the opportunity to speak first. But go ahead. What is Sweetie thinking?
Sweetie seems to agree with Taka. Taka has got valid points. He talks of the mismatch between the inputs and the revenues. A fertilizer today, go to any distributor, is times 3, correct me if I'm wrong, what it was about 2-3 years ago. We used to operate in the region of about $23 for compound, 27 to about 30 for AN. Nowadays, you are talking of 65 to 75 for AN. You are talking of a minimum of 45 for basal. So when you look at that mismatch, then you go back to the point he raised about people being effectively offered 150, depending on which rate you believe in, and someone else being paid 350 out there. It then speaks to the issue of looking at it holistically we are trying to achieve. Because if you are going to buy from the guy next door for $10, as opposed to giving your sister that same $10, but she's going to pay fees for your son and also look after your mother, that's how we need to look at some of these things. So as a farmer, I 100% agree with his point on the mismatch between the inputs and the revenues. On the issue to do with tenure, like I said, I have a different view. For me, if Rufaro is going to rent my land, pay me rent, make money, and even make a profit, then I should not be worried about the tenure issue. Because why is it he is making money from my 99-year lease, but I have enough reasons why I'm not doing the same? That's my position on that.
I want to add to what you are saying, is that our problem is that it starts from, I would say the first regulatory reform was very divisive in a lot of ways, and politically there's political polarization. So some of our problems stem from that, is that our key stakeholders have been not coming to the show because they are deliberately wanting the land reform to fail. And that's one of our fundamental problems. Because imagine, if everyone embraced this land reform, including our bankers, other key international stakeholders, and so forth, the land reform will be very successful. We would have funding for these guys and make sure that even if there are some, of course, some of these guys are mischievous. In any government-driven program, you have some mischief, but there is always ways to address those mischiefs. And I think the government itself also has played a
So in mortgage financing, there's no mischief, but suddenly in farming, there's
there is mischief. How many defaults do you know?
But
there is mischief in mortgage finance.
But if I could ask a question on that, Doc. We look at tobacco. Tobacco is almost 90+% funded via contracts. It's doing quite well. So is this an issue to do with maize?
Yeah, it's a
Is it an issue to do with tobacco? Because tobacco is part of farming, and we don't have these stories.
We don't have these stories. And also,
So what's your view?
I can answer that. So
let me just finish my contribution, because I think if you look at the tobacco sector, for example, a sector that is fundamentally turned from white to black in terms of productivity. Why don't we have all these problems? It's because the farmers, they have demonstrated, they have the capacity to produce and match the productivity levels pre-2000. And that gives us hope that this other group of farmers that are facing teething challenges can be disciplined enough to be productive. Since in land reform 2.0,
maybe GMB is not part of it.
But he's just made my case, right? So the money that's invested in farming, whether it's through a contract or a bank loan, it's colorblind. They don't care whether you're black or white. They just care about getting a return, right? And the tobacco farmers, like you said very well, have demonstrated that they can produce and deliver, and it makes sense to fund these guys. The problem with maize is that you have a central authority that sucks their thumb, and decides that this is the correct price of maize, notwithstanding what's happening.
I think we're there.
Because
I think we're the problem in this country. Let me just quickly intervene there. I think you're right. I actually absolutely don't understand why the government is obsessed with maize. To an extent that a guy driving a bakkie with a little ton of maize is arrested and should have produced letters from the GMB. I think it's ridiculous.
And the tobacco guy
And the
doesn't
tobacco
face the
drives through. I mean, the government is, I mean, the obsession
so
with
if you have
maize,
two trucks,
one in
one
front
in
with
front
tobacco,
with
will pass
tobacco
through.
will pass through,
The
and
maize
the one
one
with
won't.
maize will be put aside.
Yeah, because the government has this whole religious association with maize. I don't know where that comes from. And the government's over-involvement in the marketing of maize is ridiculous. I totally don't. I'm not a free marketer, but I don't agree
You're
with
not a free
the,
marketer?
Yeah,
Who
I
would
don't,
have guessed?
I don't agree with their attitude towards maize. Why is maize becoming gold? For example, the policy, the maize policy is very weird in the sense that you grow your own maize, Rufaro, without the government support. But suddenly, if you were you just bringing like 50 tons of yours to Mbare or something, suddenly you need a letter from the GMB. Who is GMB, for example?
So the question is, what
Why?
do the other people need to do that's being done in the tobacco sector?
Exactly.
So that the bigger picture of everyone in the field then does what they're supposed to do. Maybe that becomes the question.
So before we get back to Taka, what everybody in the room seems to be agreeing that 2.0, maybe tobacco is the go-to model.
Yeah, it's a good template.
It's a good template that we could use right across. Okay, that's something that we all have agreed on.
Agreed on? Yeah.
Strangely.
Well, that's a good place to start, and I think that's
Even
why
though-
we're on
even
Friday
though
things.
Maize nourishes people and tobacco kills people.
Well, this is what happens at Friday Drinks. Taka, you can go ahead. You can unmute yourself and you can give us your contribution.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to say, I think the issue of GMP is to do with food security. But I agree as well to say I think we should adopt maybe the tobacco model where maize is sold on auction. Let's auction the maize and the millers buy, or GMB, I don't know, whoever wants to buy, let it be a free market, because certainly the government is deliberately sabotaging those farmers. That's why there are so many problems. And the reason why you have so many farmers who want maize, because it's cheaper to produce. When you look at tobacco, they are the ones who are actually producing tobacco, and they wouldn't put policies that harm them. But I think they should deregularize the issue of grains and have a free market. If there's a flood in maize and the price is bad, it's okay. It happens. It's business. If there is a shortage, then the price is good. It's okay. I think we need to. The government just needs to balance the issue of supply and demand, but I think it needs to stay as a regulator rather than a player in the market. I think the GMP marketing board should just regulate, maybe approve buyers and all those things, and and control than to be a player in this as a buyer itself.
Okay, I think we've had a good round of responses there. So what I'm going to do again is move on to the next thing, and this is around 2.0. And the next thing that I would want to identify or want us to discuss is what does it take for a farmer to be successful, right? So we want to get into what are the ingredients that makes a farmer successful, which we can then impart in terms of, land reform 2.0. So Trevor, this is your area.
I'll jump onto that one.
Yeah.
The first thing, I think the farmers themselves, or we, because I don't need to dissociate myself from them, we need to come to the party. We need to be serious about what we are doing. My brother always says, if his daughter were to choose to wed on the day he wants to plant his tobacco, it's either she will change the date or he will not attend. That's how serious he claims to be. No, we'll try not to talk about him not being serious, but that's his view. All I'm saying is the true farmer will prioritize the farming activity over anything else. So farming first, everything else
Are
follows.
you saying you can't be a cell phone farmer?
Yes.
Okay.
And by yes, I mean if you then don't have someone else on site to make those, we call them executive decisions, then it's highly likely not going to work. Because I'll give you an example.
George, are you hearing this?
I'll give you an example. We are in the rainy season. The last 7-8 days have been raining quite a bit. It seems to have given a break. Probably the next 4-5-ish, same thing, then the rains come back. So you've given an instruction, guys, plant maize. The guys then finish whatever they were doing, they want to start planting today. There's a bit of moisture, germination is going to happen. But there will be like sun for the next 7-8 days. What's going to happen to that recently germinated crop? It's a disaster. But you being the farmer, you'll be like, oh, guys, wait. Let's wait a bit. When it's now cloudy and it's promising, you plant. It's those on-field decisions which at times then punish us. So cell phone farmer, you come back on Monday to the office, wear your suit and
He's channeling George.
then drive your Bentley to work. Fair and fine. It starts raining on Monday. You are not there. But you want the guys to plant in your presence. So they'll wait for you. Come Friday, the rains have gone.
They've taken a breather.
So now you have to wait again. So before you know it, it's now 10 February, you haven't planted.
Shouldn't you have irrigation?
You see,
Shouldn't it be automated? Shouldn't it be on my app somewhere that, I know when the moisture is right?
You're talking about
when
the guy
it's
in the
raining,
Netherlands.
And I
Yeah.
can, well, it's happening in Zimbabwe. I mean, we're talking about how to become a very good farmer. And I'm just pushing back.
Yeah.
That it's very possible for a George, if his farm is highly automated and he's got the app on his phone, and all he just needs to do is to press a button. So when it actually rains, he knows that it's actually going to rain in the next 20 minutes. The guys on the ground may not know that, but he will know because he's got
but now
all these
George
gadgetries.
has got the keys to the warehouse. And he's in Harare. The farm is somewhere out there. So the guys want to plant, they don't have access to the seed.
Okay.
They don't have access to the inputs.
George, I give up. I tried.
No, but
So we're getting used to this Twitter space, right? So it turns out that I think I can walk on and off the set. But I actually agree with Trevor. Alan, I don't know if they can... Are the mics picking me up?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I actually completely agree with Trevor. And we always say farming is not a job, it's a vocation.
Yeah.
It's got to be a calling, you've got to love touching the soil. It's like raising children, except if you're growing maize, you've got 56,000 children on every hectare. But
That
you've got to
analogy
love
is wrong
each
on
of-
so many levels.
You've got to love each one of those 56,000 kids. The way you love,
it's an interesting.
the way you
10,000
love-
for argument's
the
sake.
way you
Yeah.
love the 3 that you have at home.
Yeah.
Hopefully you only have 3. Okay.
I'll notice.
But you've got to love them and nurture them in the same way. And it's not a part-time job.
Yeah.
It's got to be a full-time job.
But
Okay.
let
Doc?
let me add.
So Doc, what we're speaking to is how in 2.0, how do we become better farmers?
I might as well clear the bar.
I think we must just be aware that one, I think we have a historical problem in this country that most of our beneficiaries of the land reform, maybe it's because of the colonial hangover. People think they can simply be rich through agriculture. I just want to warn people. Rhodesian farmers with the best state that was supporting them struggled a lot. So when you venture into farming, don't picture yourself in a Land Cruiser being happy, everything. It's a hazardous road, man.
Doc, are you talking
It's a
about me?
completely hazardous road. It's a, don't have this fantastic idea because you saw a white guy when you were young with a Land Cruiser doing. The guys were indebted. So you've got, don't have a fantastic idea of farming. And I think that has been our problem with the new farmers, is that a guy gets into this huge farm, suddenly he just thinks he's going to make money with very little effort. And I think that's a problem because they don't understand the trials and tribulations a lot of the farmers whose land they occupied went through. There were a lot of bankruptcies. There were a lot of, it's a skeleton cost, you know. So now I think it's a hazard. Just from a climate change point of view, agriculture as an investment is really bad. Because in Zimbabwe, you won't go for 5 years without a very bad drought. And what it teaches you is that you've got to be aware of the risks. Never mind your behavior, being a cell phone farmer and anything. It's a hazardous process.
So before Rufaro comes in, I'm just going to say something, and I would then like you to chime in. When you look at farmland, when you look at farmers right across the world, they actually make more money from the appreciation of farmland rather than from the farming itself. So if you look at what's happening in California, in fact, right across the US, it's farming land that's actually giving them a better return than the actual produce. And it speaks to title deed. But Rufaro, on what would you say about, the farmer and farming in Land Reform 2.0?
Look, I totally agree with you. I think farming is a difficult enterprise. Some of the crops that people produce, they have to run payroll for months, invest in fertilizer, irrigation, and all these inputs before they get a dime. And then they harvest, they maybe in the case of tobacco, you have to cure it, and then you deliver it.
Yeah.
And then you get paid. And then you have to do the whole cycle. I could never be a farmer.
and you know what Rufaro is talking about. It's actually so real. I don't want to point a finger at races and color and all that, but how many black farmers do you know of who've actually invested into grapes or winery?
Yeah.
And why I'm asking is because it's a 7-year project before you start harvesting.
Yeah.
So we are used to our maize, boom, 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 3-4 months, I get my money. Tobacco, I do my year, I get my money. But you are looking at 6-7 years, pumping out. But when the money starts coming in, it's good money. Also, question number 2, how many young farmers do we have in Zimbabwe? And I think this is very, very critical because we've always viewed farming as Tinashe works for XYZ, after retirement, goes to Musha, goes to his place, does the 1 hectare, and that's it. So farming has always been associated with old age, has always been associated with problems, if I can call it that. But what happened to that 22-year-old energetic boy or girl actually doing farming?
Okay. So the producer is just telling me that we don't have that much time. So with the time that we have, maybe Taka, you can come in and say a word or two. I'm just going to restrict you to 2 minutes, if you would allow, and just speak to, just a very succinct conclusion to this discussion. Taka, go ahead. Taka, you can unmute yourself. Okay, it looks like we're having difficulties there. And I know a number of speakers wanted to speak, but it might be the technology has failed us this time around. Hopefully we'll improve as we continue doing these Twitter spaces. That's the other thing that we are going to do, is every Friday we're going to have these Twitter spaces. So on any subject matter, please, if you want us to, deal with any subject matter, please let us know and we will do it. For now, I'll go around and I'll start with Rufaro. In your concluding remarks, give us a minute or two. In your concluding remarks, what have you gained from this, and what are your thoughts?
I think it's you actually raised this issue a bunch of times, and I think it's important for perspective from a national at a national level, right? We've had many debates and discussions about what's a better way to create wealth, N+1 or 0 to 1. And so that just quickly, the difference between the two is N+1 is if you've got a business that exists, you're just growing it slowly, 1%, 5% a year, and then maybe over a long period of time, you've created some meaningful amount of wealth. And then 0 to 1 is kind of like a Mark Zuckerberg at Harvard in his dorm room, creating something that didn't exist before. So you went from 0 to 1. But this 1 is it's a big number, right? Facebook's market cap is hundreds of billions of dollars. And I think one of our challenges in Zimbabwe is that we focus so much on agriculture, which is an old N+1 kind of industry, which is also difficult, right? It's hard to make money in farming. It's hard work and it's not easy. When the world has moved away from resource-based wealth creation, right? The most amount of wealth created globally in the last 10 years is by people like Zuckerberg, like the Google founders and that sort of thing. And so maybe our obsession...
Are you purposely avoiding Elon Musk? We are on to this race.
So my point is, I think one of the mistakes that we're making as well, when we focus on this, is Zimbabwe going to go from, if our GDP today is 16, 17, 18 billion, are we going to go to 200 billion with all this tinkering that we're doing, and that we're always focused on agriculture and, tinkering and, debating and discussing policy there. But maybe, are we not in the wrong movie? Has wealth creation moved to something else, and we're not applying our minds and exerting ourselves to that?
So I'll take it to Trevor. Are we not in the wrong movie?
Certainly not. I like how you put across your argument. Very good. But I always want to go back to basics. For all the people you spoke of, the shining examples of people who made money and what, at the end of the day, they want to eat. They are going to eat. We can debate what they are eating, but they are eating something. And
they're not taking a pill.
But where does the pill come from? So I think for me, it goes back to those fundamental issues to say agriculture is, can I call it the backbone? It's one of those critical things you can never run away from. If you are born in a certain family, and no matter how much you resent your brothers, your sisters, blah, 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 you come from there. So that's it. So for agriculture, I think we need to look at it differently. Stop politicizing it, for starters. Look at the benefits. There's a lot we can do. I'm a numbers person in my other life, and to respond slightly to Taka, maize, actually, if you hit your 10 to 15 tons a hectare, it becomes one of the most profitable crops around. Very few people actually know that. Tobacco, you put in about 7,000, get about 13. That's less than 100%, if my maths is right.
For sure. Yeah.
Maize, if you put in about 1.2, 1.5-ish, with the prices that we know, you can get almost 3.3. That's more than 100. So for me, it's profitable. But we now need to deal with the, should I call them teething problems, or things that we were discussing earlier on, to say, how do we do it better? And it's not always about maize. We've seen how tomatoes are thrown away, kumbare, every year. We see those not so nice pictures. Yet someone is importing tomatoes. We see how onions are rotting, yet we import onions. I strongly feel we need to change the way we think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Doc, are we in the wrong movie?
We are in a good movie, I think, at the right moment.
What's the name of the movie?
It's called agriculture. But anyhow, I think, look, food production is a national security issue. In the context of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, you have seen how food prices have escalated. During my studies as a master's student in ecology in Scotland, we visited a farm. And this farmer said, he was a wheat farmer. He said, we are only producing wheat at a loss because the government subsidizes it. When I say it's a national security issue, agriculture in Europe, in Western countries, most of the grain producers across Europe are not profitable. Yeah. They survive on harvesting state subsidies. If you look during the Trump era,
we don't have enough state subsidies.
No. Billions of dollars were offered for farmers in Iowa and other predominantly agricultural states in the U.S. And you know what U.S. did? The Elon Musks and all the people that are so-called inventors and all, they need to eat. And one of the things that they externalize the production of food to other countries. And what we are saying is that agriculture, particularly food production, is a national security issue. The state must play a role in supporting food production in any country.
You're comparing us to Scotland and to America.
But we need to look at that broader context that we always have to produce food. And again, going back to Rofaro, unfortunately, we are not a very urbanized country. 60%, our recent census shows that most Zimbabweans live in rural areas and they live on agriculture. Okay. So we must have that at the back of our mind when we think food production is critical. But I think the state must play a useful role and not promote distortions in the agriculture. This whole maize distortion nonsense must stop. I think that there's just too much control of maize. Why? If I grow my own maize, I should be able to market my maize wherever I want without meeting some guy saying I come from GMB. For what?
One day, he's going to join us on the free market side.
Well, on that note, which makes this a very interesting chat, I think let's keep in mind that this is Land Reform 2.0. Let's continue the conversation. What has been very illuminating from this discussion is that land reform is an ongoing process. It's not going to end. Even though we're not part of it in the year 2000s, for whatever reasons. It was a political issue, but I think 2.0 is more likely to have us engaged fully because it's around the state, it's around taxpayers, and it's around production, and it's around movies, whether or not we're in the right movie. But I think there are a number of areas where we agree on. There are a number of areas where we still need to chat. Those at home, those on Twitter Space, YouTube, Facebook, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found this discussion as enthralling as I did. And we're looking forward to the next live, which is next week, on another hot topic. Please let us know in your comment sections what you would like us to discuss and who you would want us to invite on the show. We're always happy to have you. This is not entirely a drinking show. Conversations.
It's called Friday Drinks.
It's not just alcohol. And because I'm anchoring, Mazoe, thank you very much, and have a nice weekend.